Yep.
Steve, can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yeah.
Terrific, terrific. Great to see you, Steve.
Good to see you. Okay.
Um,
You
first,
look like you're ready to go to college.
if we can find one that's open, right?
Yeah.
Well, first, for everyone tuning in, welcome this evening. My name is John Hybush, and I have the honor of being the executive director of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute. It is a pleasure to have all of you join us this evening, especially with the special guest that we've got with us this evening. I'm coming to you, obviously not from my living room, as where probably Steve is, but from the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library. That plane behind me flew 7 United States presidents, including our favorite, President Reagan. And a number of people have asked, what's the status? The Reagan Library's been closed. Is it ever gonna reopen again? Of course, it is going to reopen. We've been closed now for 7 weeks, and we, because of this terrible coronavirus crisis, we hope not to be closed for 7 more. But until then, you can always find us on all of our social media channels, from our website, of course, our YouTube channel, or Twitter, Facebook, iTunes, podcasts, any number of ways you can reach us. And we invite you to do that for the next few weeks before we get back open. For now, the best we can do is bring you incredible special guests like Steve Forbes, who's with us this evening. Thank you again, Steve, for coming this evening and spending some time with us. I know people are genuinely interested in your advice and what you have to say as we try to get America reopened once again, a thing that so many people are anxious for. Steve Forbes truly doesn't need introduction. You certainly know him from all his Forbes communications properties, especially Forbes magazine. Steve's been a fixture on the national economic scene for many years, a leading mind in America on our economy and business worldwide. Some people will remember Steve was appointed by President Reagan to the board of Radio Free Europe in 1985. And from then on, everyone in this nation, worldwide actually, will remember Steve for his expertise on supply side economics, his lifelong pursuit of trying to get this nation to a flat tax, a presidential candidate in 1996 and 2000. And for us, it's a special thing because Steve is a trustee of the Reagan Foundation and Institute. We've been just delighted to have him work with us over the years. And the final plug I'll give is this impressive tie I'm wearing was a gift to me from Steve Forbes several years ago. And I thought I'd wear it in your honor, Steve. So thanks so much.
Well, thank you, John. It's a great pleasure to be with you. And thank you for being the best dressed man in the nation tonight. Really appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
It's
Steve,
a great backdrop too.
Yeah, it sure is. It's a special one. It's normally filled with 1,000 people who would come to see you at a place at our place each time. But for now, we'll just do with it as a backdrop. Steve, obviously we are living through some tremendously difficult times in this nation. This nation's had it tough before, whether you want to say the Great Depression, some of the financial crises that have occurred, the most recent one in the 2007, 2008 timeframe. But I can't think of a time in American history where the entire nation was just shut tight. And I wonder if your view is that the ramifications of that is going to lead us into something more severe than a severe recession, but an actual depression. I mean, do you think that things could get that difficult for us?
Well, you're right. This is absolutely, John, unprecedented in American history. And it's amazing going back 20 years, 9/11, you'd think it would be probably the biggest event in one's life. The disaster of 2008, 2009, you thought you'd never see anything like that again. Here we are 12 years later, faced with something that no one could have foreseen, that we'd have a pandemic and get the reaction that we've had. And so it is totally unprecedented. So I think you have to cut a little bit of slack to policymakers because they didn't have kind of a playbook with this. This was inventing as you went along because there were no real precedents. We've had severe diseases in this country. I'm old enough to remember the 1957-58 Asian flu, which if you adjust for age and for population, killed about 250,000 Americans. The Hong Kong flu, about a decade later, took tens of thousands of lives. But we've never had a situation which hit the world almost simultaneously and engendered a total shutdown with a few exceptions. And so the key is how quickly can we come out of this with the realization that until we get effective treatments, which I think we will in a few weeks, they're very promising. It's amazing the amount of brain power that's been applied. And it's also amazing how much bureaucratic obstacles have been cleared, which begs the question why we had those obstacles in the first place. I think that's going to be a very key for next year in terms of post-election, not to mention as election campaign issue. But the question becomes then, how quickly can we get this economy back on track again, knowing that we are going to have more cases? I think we will get the virus very quickly, but how can we do this? And I think what's beginning to be appreciated, Americans are still rightly concerned about health. I'm in the age group that is very vulnerable. And so I'm going to have to take more care than my more healthy and robust and smarter kids. But so there are going to be restrictions. But the key thing is we're going to have to try to realize more and more, and I think the American people are realizing more and more, there are costs to this shutdown, not just economic costs, but also psychological costs and people losing hope. Imagine starting a business. I met a fellow in the green room at Fox just before everything shut down. He was about to open a restaurant. He'd saved for years in the cart business. And now, boom, absolutely ruined through no fault of his own. And that takes a psychological toll. We know keeping people cooped up together doesn't always bring out the best in them. Of course, our household is an exception, except when I get off this show. And so there are very real costs. And I think we are going to, if people worry, okay, we start to open up, what if we get it back again in the fall? I think by then, not only will we have more real proven effective treatments, so you don't have to worry that this thing is going to take the course that it might now. But also, I think it's going to be a much more, John, nuanced and refined approach. We'll focus on who are the vulnerable groups. I think we're going to know by then. If you have certain kinds of heart conditions, you're going to have to take extra special precautions. It's not going to be this one size fits all, shut everything down. So I think it's going to be a more laser-like approach. And I think that's going to prevent a redescent into the kind of economic disaster we're facing in the second quarter. And then the question becomes, how many businesses are going to be around this summer? We had the PPP, we have a lot of other programs, but one of the things I worry about is still a lot of small businesses haven't got the help they needed yet because the money's going to run out again. But even more importantly, the Federal Reserve, not to get in the weeds too much on this, the Federal Reserve has a major program called the Main Street Lending Program, which was originally designed to help smaller and mid-sized businesses get credit that they wouldn't get from, say, the PPP or from normal banking or access to the capital markets. And unfortunately, and I give credit to the Journal on this, Hubbard, who worked in the Bush administration in the early 2000s, wrote an article, co-authored an article several weeks ago saying this program has onerous conditions that are ridiculous under the circumstances. And they should throw caution to the winds. I hate to say this, but in terms of banking, remove that $500,000 limit, go down to $50,000. And if a business is was viable before the disaster, make sure they get the credit. There's now a story, the Journal again had a great story today on how a number of small banks in this country are not only went out of their way working 24/7 to make loans to their customers, they went out and sought other customers that they felt would be abandoned by the big banks. So this gets to a great American spirit of people. Yes, we got a problem, but by golly, we have an opportunity because of the slowness or mistakes of others. They can move in and fit a very real need. So I think the economy will start to come back. I think we're going to see a real contrast of what states do it well and what states don't do it well. I don't know why, just as an aside, California can't open its beaches if people behave and social distance. I think people need sunshine. That's good to get rid of. D3 is good for going after this virus. So get them out on the beach.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to see, so sadly, I live in a part of the country where New Jersey is the most densely populated state in the union. New York's been particularly hard hit. We're going to be slower, but in other parts of the country, I think you're going to see much more opening faster, but it's going to be jagged. And the key thing is, if this thing starts to come back again, rear its ugly head in the fall, I think we're going to have a better approach, and we're not going to suffer the kind of damage we do now. But psychologically, it's a toll. And you go out to a restaurant, you're going to have a window, plastic window between tables, so that not much romance is going to get done in that kind of atmosphere. But we'll find ways of adjusting.
Yeah.
The bounce back spirit of the American people, I think, will get us through, but it's not going to be evident until the fourth quarter.
Yeah. So if you're seeing a jagged picture across the United States, Steve, does that essentially rule out, what President Trump would dream to see, and that'd be a V-shaped recovery where we are just.
Well, you'll see in certain sectors a V-shaped recovery. And others, it's going to be very disappointing. And one of the things where I wish the Fed and others would get off their duff is that come Labor Day, a lot of businesses, a lot of these programs will have run out, 8-week, 12-week programs. And a lot of businesses, smaller, medium-sized businesses, are going to face a question: can we continue on? And that's where I think some real hard decisions are going to have to be made in terms of making sure if you think you got a chance, you got the credit to do a chance. Because I think the president's right, in the fourth quarter may not be the kind of V-shapes he's hoping for, but I think people will realize things are on the mend. And I think psychologically, people will be recovering from what's a handshake, that kind of thing. I think people will recover from that. But, and this then gets one thing, and then I'll let you ask the next question. That is, the fall is going to be a major battle, kind we haven't seen since Ronald Reagan ran in 1980. What kind of country are we going to be? Are we going to go the European way of higher taxes, heavier government involvement in business, government control of healthcare, or are we going to go lighter taxes, lighter burdens, which we know work, and more real free enterprise and patient control of healthcare? Those are you can't get more issues stark than that. So what direction do we want to go in? That, I think, is going to be the great debate this fall, and whether we're going to have a good 2021 or one just pockmarked by disappointment.
Yeah, Steve, we're starting to see major bankruptcies of major companies. What single thing can our policymakers, the Fed, lawmakers do to try to stave off what a number of people are worried about in the way of just massive bankruptcies across the country?
Well, that's what these programs are supposed to address. If you're solvent before the crisis, you would get the assistance to see this thing through. And it's had some success, but I think they are still, regulators, including the Federal Reserve and our Treasury Department, still haven't recovered from 2008, 2009, where they felt lax banking standards nearly ruined the country. And so that's why a lot of small businesses, when they applied to big banks, found themselves facing 45-page loan applications, whereas the smaller banks said, hey, here's 6 or 8, help you fill it out, and let's get it done in 30 minutes. And so this mentality is reflected in that Main Street lending program of the Federal Reserve, where they're still trying to prevent losses. And I understand the banks might be worried that the regulators will come in after the crisis and say, aha, you didn't cross every T or dot every I, and we're going to gig you. I think Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, has to make very clear, no gigging. Turn off 2008. This is 2020, very different circumstance. A lot of those companies can still be saved with a timely infusion of credit and longer terms. I mean, not do 2 years or 2 months. How about 10 years and pay it off? You know, this is an unusual circumstance. This is the only time, as you said at the beginning, that the government deliberately closed an economy down because of a healthcare crisis. Deliberately, it wasn't because of stock markets or speculation or anything like that. It was deliberate. So it was not your fault. You should, as much as possible, be made whole, or at least have a chance to survive and fight another day. It's only fair.
Yeah, Steve, early on in this crisis, I watched, as you advocated, just let's suspend the payroll tax. And I know President Trump mouthed those words a few times as well. But do you think, are we past the point of that happening, or are you optimistic that, you know, if things continue to stay tough as they are, we might get pressed to take a measure like that?
Well, the sooner we do it, the suspension of the payroll tax, the better. Everyone is familiar when you look at your pay stub, FICA, Federal Insurance Act, to help you have insurance when you get old, Social Security and Medicare and that. But the key thing is on FICA is that you can suspend it and it would have a miracle effect. As you know, it's 15.3%. Half employer, half employee. So if you're making $40,000 a year, you suspend it for 12 months. That's the equivalent of a $3,000 raise. Remember, that FICA tax, payroll tax, hits you from $1. There are no exemptions, no deductions. It hits you from the top, and you still pay federal income tax on that income, that $3,000 you lost on the top. And so an employer, $3,000 that they have to pay extra to have somebody on the payroll. You suspend that immediately provides relief for employers, immediately gives employees who are working extra money. And the beauty part of it even more is it costs nothing to administer. You don't have to set up a new bureaucracy, a new program. You just say, not going to pay the tax. You don't owe it. You're not going to owe it. And voila, it's done. $1 trillion, real stimulus. Stimulus.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is where I think we'll see what President Trump does. But I'm hoping, I think he's leaning this way, is just make it a separate proposal, not part of a package, but this is up or down.
Mm-hmm.
I think he'll force Speaker Nancy Pelosi to cave in, because polling came out from McLaughlin Associates over the weekend, and other polls show the same thing. Overwhelming support for a year suspension. And among Democrats, the McLaughlin poll found 62% in favor, only 21% against. So if they push on it, I think she's going to have to cave. She'll try to get something in return. The president just say, no, on this one, it's clean, pure. We can negotiate about other packages, but this one, you got to do it, and got to do it now. And I think he will get it.
Yeah, it seems to be the one proposal that would have the most immediate impact. So I am surprised they didn't jump to that, excuse me, initially. How about on the capital gains side, Steve? Isn't that also another way we could really spur some investment in the economy?
The answer is on the capital gains tax, yes. Now, we know the Democrats are going to say, oh, you're going to help the rich and all that kind of thing. But this is maybe where we have to wait till after the election. But you can make the case now. This affects everyone who has a 401k. Yes, 401ks and IRAs and the like are tax-free, but we know stocks are priced at the, as economists say, at the margin. That if you lower the burden on equities and on gains, on risk-taking, you'll get more of them. And so that would help investment. The only way we're going to get a real recovery is with investment, so don't punish people who are taking risks to make things happen. And we also have the added bonus in this time of trillions of dollars of deficits. The Treasury announced they're going to borrow $3 trillion in the second quarter. And we know from experience, every time you cut the capital gains tax, you instantly get more revenue because people sell old assets if you don't punish them for making the sale. So that loosens up capital, allows capital to go to more and better opportunities. The government gets a bonus right from the get-go because they get to collect money on the lower capital gains tax. They always collect more than they did before, always. 100-year experience, without exception. It works.
Steve, are you concerned at all? I mean, the more money, the better, the quicker to get this nation back on its feet. Are we going to drive any inflationary pressures from all this money?
That's the danger. And it's one that I don't think the Federal Reserve is really paying attention to. And the sad thing is, I don't think they know what to do about it if it rears its terrible head. And that's why the gold price has gone up. Even before the Corona crisis, it was not liking what was being done to the dollar. And people say, well, the dollar's so strong against the euro and this currency. Yeah, but they're all weak. It's the weak leading the weak. And so the $1,700 gold price, I believe in the gold standard, but when the gold price goes up, that worries me. This gets to a very basic question. Should you invest in gold? My answer is always no. You don't invest in gold. You buy gold as a hedge, as an insurance policy against mistakes being made. I'm being polite, mistakes being made by Treasury, by Washington, by Congress and the Federal Reserve. So you always should have some just as a hedge, but realize it's a hedge. It's not a traditional investment. It's not like building a new factory or something like that. So yes, now that leads to the question, what to do about it? The Fed's conjuring up all of this money. And that's why I'm in favor of the government floating 100-year bonds with, say, a coupon of 2.5%. You would attract and bar the Federal Reserve from buying them so they can't create money out of thin air. And that way you would mobilize savings here and all around the world. As you know, there are trillions of dollars of bonds around the world that have negative interest rates. They would flood into this thing. We get a tsunami of money coming in to buy these bonds. And that way you're not creating new money. You're mobilizing existing savings, pension funds and others would gobble these things up. And you could finance a lot of this in a very safe way and not have troubles down the road. And so I hope the Treasury Department resists it just because it's different. They hate to have anything change. And they'll always say, well, Wall Street won't accept it. I guarantee you, if you put 2.5% bond, long-term bond, 100-year bond out there, I guarantee you, you'll have a problem with software not being able to handle all the incoming bids.
Let me ask you about something it's obviously unavoidable, but all of the social distancing rules that businesses, pick restaurants, theaters, what have you, that they are going to and they are putting in place to support people's safety. Steve, do you think it's possible for these businesses that are already operating on such thin margins to steer out across at 1/4 of the customers they used to have? It just seems to me almost untenable.
It is untenable if you take the old model. But I think as people, we get effective treatments, not just the promise, but people see that they actually exist. So it isn't a death sentence if you're of a certain age and have certain conditions. We'll know more through more testing who may have already had it and didn't know it and therefore have presumably an immunity. I think the fear factor will go down. So people will be less hesitant as they would be now. Now, psychologically, no one wants to go near anyone in many parts of the country. But that will start to abate as you realize we've got our arms around this thing. But the other thing is, I think you will see creative ways in which you can have those barriers like you see in some of the supermarkets now, and designers will figure out ways to make them prettier than what we see now, these pieces of plastic, whatever, in which you can get greater capacity than what you see now. And one of the places of sadness that may actually be a benefit for the food business is the fact that even before the coronavirus crisis, a lot of malls were in trouble, a lot of that extra space. So you can do what some restaurants have always done. You have game rooms, you have stuff where you can do things. You don't have to touch human beings, but you can play around or do things, occupy things, watch things while you wait for a table. So with those apertures, whatever you want to call them, walls or whatever, mini walls, which they'll find ways to make more attractive than what we see now. I think clever people will find ways to get higher volume. And then when we get the vaccine, and the other good thing about on getting a vaccine is the intellectual capital goes into it means I think we're going to get more effective vaccines in the future against the yearly viruses, we call them flus, that we get out of Asia. There's no reason why, this will be 30% effective. This year will be 55% effective. We'll find ways to make them almost 90%, 95% effective, which will be a huge advance.
You mentioned testing as a way to help us support the economy as we move forward. Are you convinced that the federal government is doing enough now to promulgate testing and support all the states to this extent that they're going to need it?
Well, a lot of progress has been made from a standing start, and why we had a standing start in February. I think some agencies have a lot to answer for in terms of how this initially was approached. Worries more about turf than getting the thing done. But we're now up and running. I think we can do more and should do more, whether having companies licensed for a short-term period of time, some of their technology, like the great Abbott technology, so that the more tests we have, the more information we have, and the more precise policies we can have to determine what is effective and what isn't. And the more we learn about this disease, which is highly unusual, which leads to a whole host of other questions that I'm not competent to handle, but I think there's still a lot to be learned about this thing, the origins. But anyway, I think that, I wish there'd be even more urgency on testing, and we do be doing even more. But I think by the fall, which is going to be crunch time for a second round, I believe we'll have a good volume of tests ready to go, easy to administer, so you can get a quick answer, antibody tests and things like that.
Yeah. Steve, there are still so many unknowns out there in terms of the impact the crisis is having on the economy. I'm surprised that the stock market has moved to the level that it presently is. It's, we can't say it's rebounded, but it's certainly heading in the right direction. Would you advise people right now to get back into the market?
Well, I'll answer that with a favorite saying of my grandfather, who founded our company over 102 years ago. He was an immigrant from Scotland, grade school education. But when he founded Forbes magazine, people would ask him, what's the economy going to do? What are interest rates? What stocks to buy and all that kind of thing. And he would reply, we make more money selling the advice than following it. So with that regulatory caveat out of the way, I think you have to approach investing two ways, because we all think we're long-term disciplined investors, and then until the market goes down. And then we say, is it too late to get out? It's human emotion. So the way I think you deal with it is you take a two-pronged approach. One is for your retirement plans, whether 401ks, IRAs, Roth IRAs, pension plans, whatever plans or variety you have, you continue and always make your contributions, whether it's each paycheck like a 401k, or you do it quarterly, or you make an annual contribution to your IRA. You continue to do that regardless of the state of the economy, regardless of the state of the market. You just do it and throw it aside. You don't have time to babysit it. You put it in a handful of almost no cost index funds and let it ride. Because the thing is, when you get a downturn like we certainly have had in recent weeks, You buy more shares with the money. Dollar cost averaging, look it up. You'll end up, if you do it through your lifetime, beating, not only beating the market, but beating almost 95% of the money managers just by taking that cautious approach. So on the investment side, retirement side, don't try to react to it. Don't say, I better take money. Just always have a reserve, 5 or 10%, just cash so you can sleep at night. But just keep investing that money on a regular calendar basis. For the rest of it, depending on what your needs are, and we all have different needs, I think you have to recognize, and it sounds cliche-ish to say it, but markets always come back in this country without exception. The worst one, of course, was the Great Depression, where the Dow Jones in a 3-year period, less than 3 years, went down 89%, which would be like going from the high we had in February down to about 2000. Horrific. And we came back and eventually reached new highs. And people say, well, the Dow Jones stagnated for 25 years. You know, people look up this stuff. Yeah, but those companies, a lot of them are paying dividends. And if you had reinvested, you'd have done okay. Not great, but you'd have done okay. So on the stock side, depending on your particular needs, I would look for dividend companies. Yes, some of them are going to cut their dividends, but we saw after 2008, most don't. So the hit you take on the dividends won't nearly match the hit that the underlying equities will take. But the nice thing about dividends is it's cash coming in. It's not a promise. It's not a uptick in the market. It's cash coming in. So in terms of the market, I would advise wait. If you have the money in, don't take it out. And if you know particular situations that you believe in, fine, go ahead. But the only real caution I'd have just short term is let's see what kind of political environment we're going to have, especially come fall. Are we going to have that great debate? Because we have a clear-cut debate about what kind of country we want to be going ahead, what kind of policies and principles we're going to have, as we did in 1980. I think that's going to be good. And if we get the right result in November, I think we'll certainly have an inkling before November 3rd of how this thing is shaping up. But if we get a decent result, it's going to be, I think it's going to be good, very good. And the other thing I think is we're going to see very quickly who opened up wisely, who opened up foolishly. And I think, not to pick on people, but the governor of Michigan, who said it was legal to buy pot, legal to buy booze, legal to buy lottery tickets, but illegal to buy paint to improve your house, illegal to buy seeds to plant in your garden. You know, it's springtime. You want to be out in the sun. Hello, even Michigan gets sun. You want to get out there. And yet she barred it. You haul you off to jail if you bought flower seeds. So I think we're going to see a wide variety of executives, state executives. And as we all know, Ronald Reagan cut his teeth managing the largest state in the union. People thought with his background, how can he do that? Well, he rose to the occasion, which is why he became president.
Yeah, Steve, you know, I found this element of the coming recovery to, it's going to be very vexing because, you know, at the same time that Georgia is opening up its restaurants, its businesses, and Florida is opening up its beaches, and, you know, they'll get their economic engines starting earlier on than here in California, where you can't even set foot on a beach right now. We are still in absolute lockdown, and I wonder what your view is of as a result, this uneven recovery that's going to take place based upon who your governor is. It's an interesting.
Well, there's nothing like 50 laboratory experiments going on at the same time. I think voters, regardless of party, are going to start, once we overcome the initial shock of what we're going through, are going to start as they recover, asking hard questions about what was done, what was effective, what wasn't effective, and closing schools. There's a school of thought that maybe letting kids go to school is less harmful than keeping them at home. Some European towns and countries have done that. So we're going to learn a lot. And we're going to see also get a measure of how effective executives are in responding to changing circumstances. Now, the governor of Michigan, not to pick on the governor there, but when it was clear that mistakes were made, if she had said, look, we made a mistake, we're pulling back on that, people said, okay, good. You know, it was uncharted territory. So, you know, you're cognizant of when things are going right and when they're not going right. People cut you slack. But when you dig in and start snarling at protesters, yeah, there's some goofy protesters, more than goofy, but most are people who say, let's have a little more common sense here. So I think we're going to get some real measures. And by the way, Steve Moore and Art Laffer released a report grading governors. You can take issue with some of their grades, but what governors are doing best and which governors are doing worst, A through F, in terms of responding to this crisis. So this will make reputations and break reputations at the end of the day.
Yeah, well put, well put. Steve, I know from tracking what you've written and spoken about in the last several weeks, something you really pointed your finger at was what's happening in the energy sector, so vital to the American economy. But behind the scenes, and I saw Trump get very energized over this whole situation with Saudi Arabia and Russia, essentially trying to make a play here to destroy our newfound energy independence. I wonder if you'd speak to that for a moment and how important it is.
Yeah, well, first on Russia and Saudi Arabia, yes, they can do immense harm. But what they don't realize, even though immense harm is done, we can be thrown back for a while. The assets are there. The machinery is there. The skilled workers are there. And while you may destroy a company, may wreck certain investors, it will come back. And we're going to be on the lookout for any shenanigans that try to do this again. Then we have the collapse of the economy. Where do you store the oil? And that is devastating the whole industry. Now, the problem with the oil industry is that people think it's all the big companies, and they're occupied by evil manipulators who want to pollute rivers, burn up the environment, and make lives miserable and bring the world to an end. It's great for the bottom line to destroy the world. But anyway, we have those cliches. And it's true, most of the majors will survive this. They're all taking hits. Don't have any illusions. There's a very real question. Can some of these companies even maintain their dividends? Which they've, Shell the other day announced for the first time since World War II, 70 years, they're gonna not pay a dividend. But the real question is not the majors. They'll find a way to survive. They're very well managed, Chevron and others, Exxon, Chevron in particular. The question becomes then, what about the independents? That's been a real energy booster, you might say, to the energy industry. And they're not the Hollywood villains trying to figure out how to pollute and kill your household pet and stuff like that. These are often the innovators. They search in areas where others don't. That's how we got fracking. A fellow named George Mitchell, independent, not part of the majors, pushed that technology for years, and it paid off. He and others were really true pioneers. You want to preserve that spirit. And so you combine that with our basic property rights. Why do we produce so much more than Mexico? Because in this country, if you discover still oil or gas in most states, you're in good shape. It belongs to you. The government doesn't come in and says, no, it's ours, get lost, as they do in other countries. So I think we have to provide assistance temporarily, especially for the independents. And a lot of them are going to go down because they're over leveraged at the beginning, but a lot of them can be saved. And one of the short-term things is suspend royalty payments to the government. A lot of the oil and gas are federal land, federal waters, federal lands. You lease it. And so suspend the payments. Now the majors won't be quite as important as, except for maybe one or two majors who are in trouble. But for smaller independents, that could be a difference, make a major difference. Yeah, and there again, that is where the Fed should be told and banks should be told, If you think these are solvent, you're not going to get gigged, but keep them alive because eventually it's going to come back. There's no way the industry is going to survive on $15. And all you have to do is have a temporary blackout or a storm where you lose your electricity or where you're cooped up and you're not allowed to travel to get a feeling of what it's like if you don't have oil and natural gas.
Yeah, do you think
By the way, there's a new movie out called Planet of the Humans by Michael Moore, where, yes, they believe the world's coming to an end, but what they expose is what they see as the cronyism and basic corruption of a lot of the alternative energy industry. Very interesting.
Okay, I'll look for it. Steve, do you think the Trump administration is doing enough to come to the aid of the smaller independent oil and gas firms? Is there more that they could be doing?
I think they have to do more, and I think the key is getting Treasury Department Secretary Mnuchin to realize fully, he says it, but I don't think he quite fully grasped it yet. It's not Goldman Sachs. This is life and death, and the things, and we got to take that emergency mentality, which he recognizes to an extent, and apply it even more in the energy industry. Because why have all this bloodbath so unnecessarily? And when it's not a result of mistakes they made, it was a result of response to a healthcare crisis. And when you shut something down, you're going to suffer. And we want to keep you around because we need that energy, and we don't want to be dependent on Vladimir Putin or our natural gas or our oil.
Yeah, yeah. You know, out here, you'll be interested to know, Steve, out here in California, I just put gas in my car, and it's still at $3.60 a gallon. So somebody's making money somewhere.
Yeah, they are, and but a big chunk of that is taxes
Yeah,
and regulation.
yeah,
New Jersey, we're about $1 less. Wisconsin, I think they've got stations down to $1.30, $1.40. So it's a lot of local conditions, just as not to, not to pick on poor California, but a lot of its housing crisis and its water crises are human made. They are totally unnecessary.
yeah. You know, this next, we're going to run out of time, Steve, and I can't tell you how much we appreciate hearing from you. This next question is it's not all that relevant in present times. Right now, everyone's just trying to survive. But what advice would you give to someone starting out in business today or public service today, getting in a young, especially young people, looking at careers and, you know, given your experience over many years in politics and in business, what do you think you've learned about that you'd like to pass on to that next generation that they should be hearing from Steve Forbes today?
Wow. Well, other than reading a certain magazine, everyone says it, but it's absolutely true. Everyone has a knack for something. Find out what you have a knack at and see if you can develop it, and realize that each of us has a different pace. You may be feeling like you're floundering for years before things connect, and then be prepared too, even when things connect, they will eventually perhaps unconnect. Be prepared to be flexible. And that's why Norman Borlaug, a man who won the Nobel Peace Prize years ago because he invented what was called the Green Revolution, coming up with the seeds that stopped famine in places like India, Bangladesh, saved literally tens of millions, hundreds of millions of lives. And when he started to make breakthroughs on these seeds, he realized it's not enough to be a good agronomist or a good experimenter. You have to draw on politics, on economics, on all things he never thought he'd draw on. So he said, you got to have a mind, supple mind, to be prepared for that. And and also know you're going to get setbacks. It's a tough thing. It's a nasty teacher, but it's going to happen no matter how brilliant and smart you are. As Lincoln said, Events controlled him, he said, more than he controlled events. And realize it's a big world out there and you're not at the center of it. As my father liked to say, if you think you've arrived, you're ready to be shown the door. And more specifically, try to train yourself, easier said than done, to look beneath the surface of things. Give you one closing example. What's the biggest industry in America? We know it's healthcare. Encompasses, a wide range of things, but 18% of the economy. We could do that at less than half or 2/3 of the cost because of the way this system has evolved. And the only country, I'll tip my hand now, that does it right, that has the best healthcare system in the world, top-notch technology, universal coverage, is Singapore. They scour the world for the best practices. And because they just have, because the way they've done it, not this third-party system and all the bureaucracy we have, their system, even though the life expectancy has now vastly exceeded the US, 40 years ago, they're behind us, universal coverage, and their expenses are 25% of the US's. Now, people say they're cheating the docs. Just one statistic, a general practitioner there, the median income is $154,000, and you don't have lawsuits and that kind of worry. Specialist, $285,000. Now, that's 30% behind US comparison. However, income tax in Singapore, the top rate is 20%, and they don't have state taxes. So California, you could hit a 50% marginal rate, Singapore 20. So when you adjust for that, it's just about the same. You make the stocks make the same amount of money, and I'll just give you one other couple of one statistic. Open heart surgery in this country costs $130,000. In Singapore, with as good or better results, $18,000, with equivalent of board certified surgeons who are trained in schools here in the US and around the world. It's an amazing story. So for young people, look, don't accept things as they are. Look, and there's going to be amazing things you're going to find. Amazing. It's going to be an exciting period ahead.
Steve, last question. What are you most proud of in your lifetime? And it's not fair, you can't say your wonderful 5 daughters.
Oh, well, I will, just because I have to live with them sometimes, especially in these shutdowns. But, and great family, wife who's put up with me for a number of years. May have seemed like centuries, but I think most proud that I've headed an organization where we have responded to change, not with any ease, but remembered what Peter Drucker said: every organization should remind itself, whether it's a business, nonprofit, whatever, what is your purpose? What is it you're trying to achieve? And when you do that, you'll better see yourself through periods where the way to achieve it has drastically changed, and maybe the things you do drastically change, but the mission is still the same. And knock on wood, we've done that at Forbes. It's not me. My brother had great insights. We've got great teams today. And but the world doesn't stay still, but you got to keep focused, as Reagan did, even when he had to bob and weave politically, and realize he's living in the real world, not a perfect world in somebody's mind. You have a sense of direction. I think Reagan said, maybe others did too, but he said, if you don't have a sense of direction, every road will take you there. That could never be said about Ronald Reagan.
Oh yeah, terrific. Well, Steve, speaking of Reagan, here we are at the Mecca, the center of Ronald Reagan, in this universe. All of us so proud to work here and to be able to have a chance to talk with remarkable experts like yourself and real success stories. We've been closed like any other business for several weeks now. It's a bit painful, and it's certainly not helpful not to be able to receive the tens and tens of thousands of visitors that we get each year. As a result, what are we trying to do about it? This country, if there's one thing it's good at, it's charity. And tomorrow is another one of these famed Giving Tuesdays. The Giving Tuesday usually follows Thanksgiving, but now because of this incredible crisis besetting America, the Reagan Foundation could use a lot of people's help out there. And so for anyone that's interested in helping the Reagan Foundation on Giving Tuesday tomorrow, you can just go to reaganfoundation.org/GT for Giving Tuesday, now GTNOW 2020. And you'd be doing your favorite presidential library a real kindness. Steve, it's been just terrific to spend time with you, and we can't tell you how much, we can't emphasize enough how much we've appreciated your support and your involvement in the Reagan Library over the years. You've just been a champion for us, and we truly appreciate it. And we appreciate everyone who was able to tune in and hear you this evening. So thank you, Steve, very much.
Well, thank you, John, and you and your team. You've done a fantastic job, very innovative, and very exciting to visit that library. You really bring the man and his spirit to life. And John, you can take a bow for that. You brought the people together to do it, and it's been very exciting to see. And when you reopen, as you will, people will be in as they will discover yet again for a real treat to see what a great American can do and what great people can do to bring that spirit to life in very innovative ways. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Take care of yourself, and my best to your whole family.
You too. Thank you, John.
Bye-bye.